Welcome, everybody. New faces, recurring faces. Super nice.
So they have not had.
We will be giving people 5 minutes to arrive. Welcome to yet another session of webinars for leaders of next. And we will be starting at 35. Thank you for being here. In the meantime, if you want, you can already introduce yourself and tell us where you're connecting from in chat. Alfred and I are connecting from Bogota. I'm super excited to be here with you. Good morning, everybody. All of those of you who are arriving, super nice to have you today here with us. We are giving people some minutes to arrive before we get started at 35 sharp. In the meantime, please tell us where you're connecting from and on chat. And please know that while we are going to be doing the session, the chat is going to be active, so you can be asking questions, making comments, and keeping the conversation alive through the chat. Hi, Gary. Hi, Danny. Hi, Amanda. People connecting from Washington, Costa Rica, San Antonio, Madrid. Thank you, Alfonso. I never know how to pronounce. I don't know why I always pronounce it like in French. Mark Boise?
Boise. 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 Imagine an American in France. Boise.
Hello, AI assistant. We have machines among us.
Indeed. We need to have our waiting room music going.
Yeah, right? I was thinking about it. Nice happy. I can steal Danny's line, and people can write a word in chat.
Oh, the word for what kind of word?
A word that describes your state right now and
How you're feeling.
how you are doing right now. I am excited.
Oops.
Arching the soul machines into the next. I like that. All right. One more minute and we get started.
This 5 minutes is always the the longest part of the conversations.
Yeah. After that, it flies.
Not talking part.
All righty. I'm the time manager here, so 35. Let's get started.
Right.
We have more people registered, and hopefully they will be joining us soon. Otherwise, there is a recording, everybody, so you know we're recording this conversation, and we will be sending it over to you for you to revisit or share with people you think might be interested about this topic in particular. Today, it's an exciting day for me because I'm particularly interested about this specific topic, and I think it is a pain that a lot of us feel when it comes to getting innovation projects or innovation opportunities funded. So, happy to be here, happy to hear Greg talk about this, and excited to have all of you here join us. Today, we will be talking about how to align funding goals and resources into innovation. Most of all, how you manage funding, innovation opportunities funding. So we have here the privilege of having Greg Gully, your CEO and creator of what you're about to see. Those of you who don't know him and those of you who do, well, we have Greg again here talking to us. So without further ado, I will give you the word, G, so you can do your jump magic. Thank you for being here, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the introduction. And welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Ed, good to see you here. I know you are concerned about this topic in particular, so nice to have you with us. So as Chris said, we're gonna cover a few things. This topic comes up quite a bit when we're engaging with clients on establishing their systems of innovation, and really just the question about how do we effectively fund our innovation work, because it's a real struggle to determine exactly how to do that when they're working within the constraints of their existing budget. So the big pain and problem, as Chris alluded to here, is that we're dealing often with inconsistent funding and misaligned priorities. So we don't always see the resources or the capital that we're going to invest going to what are in fact the most significant opportunities. So the big job to be done then, given that pain and problem, is identifying first and then prioritizing high potential innovation opportunities, and then being smart about how we allocate capital to those opportunities. Doing that in a way that both creates more certainty and doesn't expose capital to risk unnecessarily. We all know that when we're dealing with innovation, there is going to be risk. We can't create transformation or change or pursue a new opportunity without some risk being involved. But how can we be smart about how we take that risk on and how we invest our capital in those opportunities? And we're going to look at one tool in particular today. We have a whole host of tools, supporting tools for this work, for the jobs to be done, the big job to be done here. But the one we're going to look at is Portfolio at a Glance. It's a drill that we use when we're helping clients really first establish how they're going to allocate funds, allocate capital across a variety of innovation opportunities. So we'll spend some time, we'll do a deep dive on that, but we're also going to provide you with a list of and links to other tools and other resources that will be helpful to you. So I think everybody who has been involved in funding innovation will confess that it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. And part of that is that it's difficult because of the degree of uncertainty. We often, when we're asking for an investment in an innovation opportunity, are asked to make a business case or to communicate what the return on investment is going to be. But we all know that in the early stage of innovation, in the first stages of innovation, there's so much uncertainty that a return on investment is really just a guess, right? It's our best guess given a whole bunch of assumptions that we're making. So that degree of uncertainty makes it feel like it's a guessing game. We're being asked to make up some fiction based on a whole bunch of assumptions that we have yet to prove to ourselves are true or untrue. The fact that we're being asked to operate with this degree of uncertainty and that we are lacking a systematic approach to funding often can result in wasted capital and a degree of frustration and maybe even cynicism about the innovation process. So when we go asking for funding, we might get a lot of eye rolls. We might get a lot of people saying, not the innovation people again, right? They keep asking for things that and failing to deliver. And largely that's because we haven't framed the way that we're funding innovation properly. So this slide is really, it sets up what's at the heart of this pain and problem that we experience. And that is that most organizations use the existing annual budget process for funding their innovation work. So if all of us who worked on the performance system side of an organization where we know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are, and we go through the annual budgeting process. Many of you may in fact be going through that right now. It happens in October and November, where we're having to say, hey, for next year, here's how much we're going to need. Here's the the human capital we're going to need. Here's the financial capital we're going to need, and we start to put together a plan. But that's really based on those things that we're certain about. For the new initiatives and new work, we might ask for some budget, and that's based on what we think it's going to cost to explore it, to develop it, to move forward. But it's unlike the other operational activities, and so that level of uncertainty can be problematic. So if we look at this slide, what we're really showing is the tension between an annual budget approach and what we're recommending, which is establishing a next fund. What you want to think about within your innovation efforts is you're operating a little bit of a venture fund. It's like a corporate capital or venture capital that's being set aside for new work. It's being set aside for opportunities that have a high degree of uncertainty, but are intended to produce some kind of capital impact or capital result for our organization. So if we want to just characterize an annual budget, it's a fixed allocation. It doesn't have a lot of flexibility. You're expected to bring your projects on in time and on budget. It encourages spending to meet budget targets. So it's not unusual for those of us in conversation today who maybe operate consulting businesses to have a client come up to you and say, hey, we need to spend this money before the end of the year, because there's this use it or lose it mantra that exists in a lot of organizations. And so it's like, I'm not going to get the funding next year if I don't use the funding this year. So it creates this kind of artificial pressure to spend. It also makes it really difficult to adapt when a project needs to change. So if we discover something new that we didn't understand at the beginning of the effort, we have to go back and ask for additional funding, and that can be quite cumbersome. And sometimes it's just impossible. There's a cap put on the budget. We can't exceed the budget, and so we're stuck. And it's based on rigid forecasts, or maybe it's based on certainty, and it doesn't account for uncertainty. So how do we navigate that when that comes up? So the annual budget process, it looks like that. A next fund actually gives you flexibility. So as we're starting to discover and learn and increase our certainty, we're able to modulate the amount of funding that's going to be allocated to a particular opportunity. It encourages investments in high potential initiatives. So it says, look, we're going to put a certain amount of capital into these opportunities. And as certain opportunities start to present themselves as having more potential than others, we can move our funding towards those. We can direct our funding towards those. And importantly, we can stop funding those that are not yielding the kind of result that we'd hope they would, or where we're learning that for one reason or another, it's not wanted, it's not doable, it's not worth it, it's not gonna contribute what we hoped it would contribute, that we can cut off funding. And that's not seen as a failure, that's actually seen as a success in a fund, because in a fund model, you're not having a pressure to spend everything, you're actually under pressure to preserve capital as much as possible so you can maximize where you invest it. it allows for reallocation based on this concept that we have of learning from investment. So we in the model, and I'll show you the next cycle in a couple of minutes. But as an opportunity is moving through a discovery-driven development cycle, at each step we're testing assumptions and we're learning something. And as we learn those things, they're creating more certainty. There might be certainty to keep going, or it might be certainty that we shouldn't be doing it, and we can reallocate our capital based on that. And a next fund supports experimentation. So you can think about it like a fund, a venture capital fund. You can also think it like about it as a fund for experiments. It's a fund that where we're gonna grant a certain amount of capital to an opportunity to run an experiment with the goal of producing the next level of certainty that we need to say keep going or stop, or slow down or merge with something else, right? So that's the tension that we're dealing with. Now, a next fund is a better approach than an annual budget for innovation, because you're basically pooling your capital together and you're allocating it to those opportunities that have the highest potential for impact and or that are producing some option value. So in the very early stages of an innovation opportunity, there's so much uncertainty that what we want to do is look at, is it creating some kind of option value? Does it actually produce value to, allows us to move more quickly, or to go more slowly, or to go at a different scale, or it gives us some flexibility in terms of what we can do and how we can do it. Or in fact, we think we're building enough value that if we decide to stop, we can recapture that value through a sale or a transfer to some other part of the organization. So a pool is just it's a different cognitive model. I'm sorry, a next fund is a different cognitive model or a mental model for thinking about how we're funding innovation than an annual operating budget. I think the biggest distinction is that it's just that the fund itself doesn't get refreshed at the end of the year, or doesn't get depleted at the end of the year. Any capital in that fund is available for any opportunity. It's not an annual budgeting process where we get to the end and now we've got to go make the case for our capital budget again. I mean, for our operating budget again. In this case, we've got the fund, it's established. We might go raise another round. We might go ask for additional funds to be put in, other capital to be put into the fund. That's quite normal, but that's not tied to an annual process. That's tied to, hey, we're looking at our portfolios, we're looking at how we've allocated our funding, and we need to top up in order to move forward on opportunities to achieve our strategic objectives. So that's a possibility. The key concepts and tools that we're going to look at in this conversation today are this idea of capital allocations. How do we actually allocate our fund across portfolios? How do we establish a portfolio view? So for those of you who don't know my background, part of my career was spent in financial services. And in that work, really looking at how do you design and manage a portfolio to achieve a certain return? It's the same concept here with innovation. How do we manage clusters or collections of innovation opportunities, projects? How do we organize them and manage them to achieve a certain set of capital impacts, capital priorities that we've got in terms of financial results, improvement of talent, generation of new ideas, intellectual property, building and strengthening our reputation, et cetera. So how do we design, and then how do we align those portfolios with our objectives? We're going to look at the next cycle itself, the discovery-driven development cycle, and how do you establish a process of funding that allows me to go from one step to the next step while minimizing the exposure of capital, not putting capital unnecessarily at risk. And then we're going to look at that portfolio at a glance drill that we talked about, just to give you a little bit more familiarity with that tool. So should you want to play around with it and start to apply it, you'll have a chance to do that. So let's begin by talking about portfolios. A portfolio, and Chris put in the chat, feel free to ask questions. I'll just keep talking. Chris is going to monitor questions and she'll interrupt me if she feels like there's something that I should address there. before we continue. So the notion of portfolios is to say we have a collection of innovation efforts going on. We want to look at them based on the kind of impact that we're hoping that they're going to have. Let's just take the financial services example for a moment, because I think it's a good analogy. I might have some money that I don't want to have put at risk. I'm going to need it in the next 5 years. And so I might put that into a money market fund. My money market fund is actually invested in a portfolio of money market instruments. I might have some other money that I'm going to may need 5 to 10 years from now. I might have that in a bond fund. Now, a bond fund is just another set of money of instruments. Instead of money markets, I'm in bonds. They have slightly higher risk and slightly higher return than money markets. And then I have my long-term investments for, say, retirement or kids going to college or buying a home in the future. Those I might have in an equity fund. And an equity fund is going to hold a bunch of different stocks. So it's going to be a portfolio holding a bunch of stocks. It has a lot more risk, but it has a much greater upside. In the same way, you can think about what are the innovation opportunities that we have, and what are the objectives, the capital building objectives of those opportunities. So we here, what we're showing is there might be some that are in a portfolio that we would call the renew portfolio, and that portfolio is really about discovering and disrupting existing approaches. So it's something that may be many adjacencies away from the core capabilities of the existing organization. It has potential for great capital building, great return, but it also has a lot of risk because it has the most uncertainty. It's really, further out in terms of the time horizon, has a lot of uncertainty, but has great potential to be disruptive in a positive way. The grow portfolio, which is where a lot of organizations put their attention, is what are the innovation opportunities that are going to allow us to grow our organization and the impact that we have and the value that we create. In a traditional corporation or commercial business, you might be looking at that in terms of new products that we could bring to existing customers or products that we could modify to access a larger market. Then we have the optimized portfolio. The optimized portfolio is what are the innovation opportunities that we have that are actually what we're trying to do with those is improve the way we're doing existing things in such a way that it creates greater value. So is there a way for us to produce even more value by modifying some aspect of an existing solution to an existing problem when we're that a known problem, known solution? And that might be a little a change to the business model. It might be if you think about something like Netflix shifting from DVDs to streaming, you say, well, that was an optimization of their business, right? It was a different medium for delivering their business. They created a huge amount of value because the amount of Netflix products that we can consume just exploded, right? That it really changed the way in which we can engage with them. And then the fourth portfolio, which is often overlooked, is the or the maximized portfolio, which is how can we extract value out of things that we've been doing and capture that value while we exit it. So the whole idea there is this is a funny category of innovation opportunities. So rather than doing something new, what we're actually doing is we're liberating capital that's currently being invested in operations or in other aspects of our organization that are no longer producing the value that we expect them to, or that value production is on a decline and we can see it ending. I'll use the Netflix example again there. Netflix put their DVD business, which was called DVD.com, into their maximized portfolio because they knew they were going to get out of the DVD business. It took them 7 years because they kept returning enough value to keep it going. But they knew at some point they were going to pull the plug on it. They pulled the plug on it last April. So they finally did after 7 years. They said, okay, it's now crossed that place where it's no longer producing the value. but they extracted a lot of value from it, and they took a lot of know-how and human capital and intellectual capital and redeployed it across their business from that particular business. So as an example, so this portfolio view of saying, hey, rather than we've got a whole bunch of innovation effort going on, let's begin to articulate. We have innovation opportunities that we're working on, and this basket or collection of innovation opportunities has this purpose. We're trying to create this kind of value. So we would articulate what is the performance expectation or the value creation expectation of that, the capital building expectation of that portfolio. For each portfolio, we'd like to be able to articulate that. We have a client, when we started working with them, they had 285 innovation opportunities going on around the world. They couldn't tell us where they were in the development cycle. They couldn't tell us why they were working on them or how much they'd spent on them. But they'd spent a lot, and or how much they were planning on spending on them going forward. So you need to, if you're going to be doing this funding work, you need to be able to have a very structured, rigorous, disciplined approach to talking about how we're organizing our opportunities and how we're investing capital in them, right? I mentioned the next cycle, and the next cycle is an innovation opportunity takes this journey, right? It starts at this formulate stage in the upper left-hand corner where it says formulate number 1. And it says, is the opportunity aligned with our vision, our purpose, our goals, our strategy? What is the opportunity? What's the pain or problem that we've identified that says, hey, if we do something about this, we can create great value? And then how have we prioritized those? So in this, each of these stages, the formulate stage, the incubate stage, the accelerate stage, and the operate stage, we're going to be funding opportunities. We're in fact might be funding opportunities at each step of each stage. And that's a way that you control the risk to capital. As you say, all right, great. You've prioritized these. Which of these are going to, and the diamonds that say S7 on them, that's Super 7, that's a decision-making criteria to say which of these opportunities are going to move to the next stage. Moving to the next stage means they're going to be funded. We're going to put some funding into those, right? And so we want you to kind of have this model in your mind to say, as we're looking at our opportunities, have we articulated what we call this the next cycle, what our discovery-driven development cycle is? Do we know what the steps are? Are we funding each step? Do we have an ability to do that? And are we having these gatekeeping moments? Like here we have 4 of them on this diagram, where we check in and we actually make a funding decision about what's going to get funded to move to the next stage. What are we going to actually stop funding? So that we're protecting capital at each step and at each stage, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at that portfolio at a glance drill. I'm going to look at this. This is a poster. I'm kind of doing the slow reveal of a poster that's associated with this drill in the lab, just to get focus on the different sections on it. So we'll build this poster one little layer at a time. And so the first thing is we're looking at on this particular diagram is, and let's see, can I, I'm not sure if I can. Oh, here we go. Maybe I can. Okay, yeah, there we go. So are you seeing, when I'm drawing on this, are you seeing it? Okay, great. All right. So yay, I just discovered where one of my little pens are. So on this, we're actually looking at allocating our funds based on portfolios, goals, and planned opportunities. So this first line, just what's the fiscal year we're planning for? Which portfolio is it? Which portfolio is it? What are the goals? What's the capital build? What are the capital building goals associated with this portfolio? What's the total amount of the fund that's available? And then what percentage of that fund are we going to actually allocate to this portfolio? So if this is the growth portfolio, we might allocate 50% of the fund. So if I had a $10 million fund, I might allocate $5 million to this growth portfolio. And then what's the number of planned innovation opportunities for the year? So if I've got 5 million, and I won't do the math on the fly because I went to art school, not math school. But if I were going to do it, to say, let's say I had 100 planned opportunities for the year, I would divide the 5 million that I've allocated by 100, and I would say, here's what my opportunity funding benchmark is for each innovation opportunity in this portfolio. I have a benchmark of how much I'm going to allocate to it. So that's just to say, and that you can be flexible on that, but you want to just have the benchmark in your mind to say, as we're doing this work, and as we're checking in, are we tracking? Are we actually on the right path in terms of how much we're allocating to this particular opportunity? And if we've allocated more than our benchmark, then we just know that there's going to be some reduction of the available funding for other opportunities in the portfolio. Then we're just going to balance that as we go, right? So let me, okay. There's something else that I've discovered about Keynote, which is, when that tools are up, you can't advance. Okay, so that's just the top layer. Let me find my cursor again, and I'll get my little marker, and I'll start again here. So now the next layer of this that we're going to look at is we've identified for a portfolio what the capital building goals are, how much our total fund is, how much is allocated to this, how many opportunities there are, and what our funding benchmark is. Then we are going to set some thresholds, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Some of you have already been involved in a conversation with us about our Worth It tool. And our Worth It tool is a tool that you can use to actually evaluate what is the capital risk associated with the opportunity, what is the potential capital contribution, what are the capital needs, and what would the capital impacts, the overall capital impact score be, and then what's the overall option value. Now, if you're not familiar with that tool, and if this is the first time you're in one of your conversations, let me just remind you, we have a rather robust model for when we say capital. It's not just financial capital. We're not just talking about dollars or euros or pesos. We're actually talking about human capital that we're going to spend. We're talking about the intellectual capital, the political capital, the reputation capital, the social capital, and the financial capital. So that Worth It tool allows you to evaluate all of those and then to come up with a score. We score these on a basis of 1 to 5. So I might have an overall capital risk score threshold that says, I don't want to have anything in this portfolio that has capital risk above a 4. Now, this is a growth portfolio, so I might be willing to take on more risk in this portfolio than in my optimized portfolio. I don't want anything in my optimized portfolio that has a capital risk score of a 4, right? It's just, it's not appropriate. That portfolio, I have a lot of certainty around the problem and the solution, and I'm just optimizing. So my threshold for inclusion in the portfolio would be lower. So here, this example on the capital risk score, I'm just talking about how much for this portfolio would I be willing to take on. Now, the overall capital contribution score, what's my threshold? Think about this. This isn't, I mean, I'd take a 5. I'd love a 5, but what's the lowest amount of capital contribution? That is, this opportunity might produce a certain amount of capital for us. What do I expect that it's going to produce? Is 1 too little? Is 2 enough, or 3? So I might say, oh, for growth, 3 or above. What are the overall capital needs that it has? So here I said on my risk for this, if this is growth, let me just go ahead and try to scribble growth on here. I'm just to remind myself that I'm in a growth portfolio. So I've got a growth portfolio. I've said I will take risk up to 4 because it's growth, and I'm willing to take on risk for that. My capital contribution has to be at least a 3. My overall capital needs score, let's say it's going to be I don't want to really have needs that are higher than a 2. So that means it's not going to be super high. And then what's my overall capital impact score? So let's say that here to stay in my portfolio, maybe I'll say it needs to be between a 2 and a 3, right? And then what's the overall option value that I'd be willing to take? Now, that depends on where you are in the next cycle. Early on, I want high option value. As my portfolio matures, as my opportunities move closer to operation, this might be a little bit lower. But let's just say I have a mix of opportunities in my portfolio that are kind of all over in terms of where they are in their development cycle. And maybe my option value, I want to have an overall 3 as well. So basically what we're doing here is we're establishing some metrics, some thresholds to say when we're looking at our growth portfolio and evaluating our innovation opportunities, I want to look at the scores and I want to see whether or not this qualifies to be included in my portfolio. That for a funding purpose, that says I'm not funding anything that doesn't meet these thresholds, or I'd have to, if I'm going to, it's going to have to be for some exceptional reason. I will give you a hint that sometimes the option value is where that exception comes in, because I might be seeing my capital impact score is not high enough yet, but we're in the formulate stage or we're in the incubate stage. And I'm willing, because the option value is so high on this, we're going to keep funding it. We want to get more certainty and see if we can't actually make this work. And I'm going to redirect my teams that are working on that particular opportunity to say, hey, your capital risk score is too high, or your capital need score is too high. Figure out how to bring the risk down or the needs down, or your contribution isn't high enough. Look at your opportunity and think about how it could produce more value. Because if you could bring that value up and the risk down and the needs down, then your impact score is going to go up. And that will allow us to continue doing it. Now I'm having a conversation about a metrics-based conversation that's determining, am I going to fund this or not? It's not just, it's a project that I'm expected to start at the beginning of the year and deliver at the end of the year, which is how operating budgets work. This next piece here is just looking at what are the total number of opportunities that we expect. I think to go through, how many are we going to have in our portfolio, and where, at what stage are they? So how many opportunities do I have in the formulate stage? How many do I have in the incubate? How many are in accelerate? How many are at operate? And how many are at grow? So I'm just looking at where are my opportunities currently in their development life cycle, in their maturity. This is a really important box, because it's a concept that doesn't exist in operating budgets. And this box is this box is the formulate. I'm sorry, this box is the attrition rate. And what it says is, in a portfolio, I don't expect every one of the opportunities in the portfolio to actually make it through to operation. We expect attrition at each stage of development. And that means what I fund in the early stage, the formulate stage, half of those won't even make it into the incubate stage. So I'm not going to overinvest early. I'm going to put in a light amount of funding to demonstrate that there's a real need, there's a real opportunity. And those that actually get promoted into the incubate stage, then I'm going to increase what I fund. Now, I'm not going to fully fund those either. I'm going to wait and see, do they get through the incubate stage into the accelerate stage? There's going to be some more attrition there. So for budget planning purposes, make sure that you are making some guesses at what your attrition rates are going to be. What do we plan on? Monitoring those and adjusting your attrition rates as you go through a development cycle, because they're going to really determine and regulate the spend of capital throughout the development process. Okay. All right, let me close this one out and let's go to the next build. I can, okay. Which is estimating capital impact. I just talked about this a little bit in terms of the worth it drill. The worth it drill allows us to actually determine the capital impact for individual opportunities. And what we want to look at here is, what is for the portfolio? If I take all of the opportunities in my portfolio and I roll them up, what is the capital impact score that I'm looking for at the formulate stage, the incubate stage, the accelerate, operate, and grow stage, and what is my actual capital impact score average currently? And the capital impact for us is the primary metric that we look at here. It is actually the combination of the other scores. Its capital impact is determined by taking the capital contribution score and subtracting the average of the risk and the need score. And that's how you end up at that. And so this is an interesting metric to be keeping your eye on, to say, is our portfolio in good health? Is it actually achieving a lot looking like it's going to produce the impact that we want it to produce? And if it's not, then what do we need to do to rebalance it to make that happen? That might mean stopping some things. Again, stopping means stopping to invest in them, no longer funding them. Or it might mean we've got to actually fund a little bit more to bring the impact score up in some of these opportunities. Okay. And then the final piece here is this next stage funding layer. We're actually looking at the what have we allocated to each stage of our next cycle. So of the for a benchmark funding of say 500,000 on a particular opportunity, how much is allocated for the formulate, how much is allocated to the incubate, how much to accelerate, how much to operate, how much to grow. What's our benchmark? Where are we currently in terms of our portfolio, and what's still available? So this is think of this as like a manual dashboard for looking at your portfolio and understanding where things are. And then in the bottom corner, left-hand corner there, we have portfolio funding that's actually been granted and what's still available. So just a tracking tool for thinking about how are we going to take this fund and how are we going to distribute it across opportunities and across development stages of our next cycle. All right. So let's see if I can erase all those things that are hanging out there. Yeah, we'll let them hang out there. So the example, let's go ahead and Chris, is this an example linked to a Miro board? Okay. So let me get rid of this thing again because it weirdly turns off my let me go ahead. All right, so I'm going to go in this Miro board. Boy, how do I get rid of all that stuff? Let me here. I can do it. I think I can close that. No, I really want to get rid of that. Oh, here we go. Clear all my drawings. All right. So the example, let's go in very quickly. I know we're getting towards quarter after here. So let me just go ahead on this Miro board. Are you seeing the board? Okay, good. Let me get rid of this little toolkit here. And oh, okay. Yeah, interesting. All right. There we go. All right. So let me zoom in. So here's an example where we have fiscal year 2024 growth portfolio, a set of portfolio goals that have been established. Total available 10 million. 40% is being allocated to this particular portfolio, meaning there's 4 million here. 50 planned opportunities, meaning we have 80,000. On average, we have 80,000 for each opportunity. I have a minimum score for the portfolio inclusion. Now I've set ranges here in this example of, we're kind of looking at 3. I don't want anything, greater than or equal to. I could say greater than or equal to 4 is we should stop it. 3 is caution. Less than or equal to 2 is keep going. So color coded as a sort of stoplight, right? Here on the overall contribution, capital contribution, greater than or equal to 4, keep going. At a 3, you're getting a yellow flag. We're going to sort of watch it, be mindful. We've got to figure out how to improve that contribution score. Less than or equal to 2, we're going to stop. We're going to archive the opportunity. So you can see this idea of setting some thresholds for what's a green light, what's a yellow light, what's a red light in terms of the scores we're looking at. Here's that attrition rate being applied. So let's say we've got 50 opportunities. We have a total number of planned opportunities are 40. I've got 10 going on right now, an additional 40 planned. So I think 50 are going to go through formulate. I'm going to have 66% attrition rate, which means 17% will be promoted to the next stage. 33 will be deferred. We don't say killed. I did use the word killed, I think, but we're not necessarily going to kill the project. We're going to defer it. We're going to defer the opportunity because some conditions may change where we want to revisit these. So think of it as like archiving it or shelving it. We're going to put it off. We're not going to continue. We're going to stop it for now. We're going to pause it. we may revisit them because some technology might catch up to us, some regulation might change, some market might open up that would allow us to actually restart an innovation opportunity. So I like to think of these as deferred when we look at attrition. But you can see how this works. We started with 50. By the time we get to what goes into the operation, we have 6. This is very unlike a performance system. If I give you 50 projects at the beginning of the year and a budget, you're expected to deliver all 50 projects on time and on budget. In a next system and an innovation system, if I ask you to identify 50 opportunities, I do not expect you to deliver all 50 opportunities, nor should you fund them as though they will. You're gonna actually, based on your attrition rate, have an expectation of how many of those opportunities are going to actually go into operation. Whether it's a new product, a new service, a new experience, a new policy, a new process, a new business model, whatever it is. In this example, these attrition rates get us to 6 actually going into operation. So we see at this point, 5 are going to get promoted actually into growth, meaning, hey, not only are we operating, but we think there's opportunity to expand these. 1, we may say there's not really an opportunity to expand. So we park that. Here we're looking at estimated capital impact and how it might change over time. What's our target? Our targets are greater than or equal to 2, then to 3 as we get into accelerate, and 3 as we get into operate, and it goes back down to 2 in the growth, because again, when we're moving into growth, we're introducing a whole new set of uncertainties about how we're going to actually grow this thing, how are we going to scale it, how are we going to make it bigger. It's a different kind of innovation opportunity there. And we can see how we're comparing in this example to our targets. Our allocation for funding, so of the $80,000 that each opportunity gets, we're saying 10% on the formulate allocation, 25% on incubate, 40% on accelerate, 10% in operate. Basically, when an innovation opportunity makes it into operation, you're handing it over to the performance system. You're handing it over to the now system. They're going to operate it. It's going to be funded out of their operating budgets. We allow a little bit of funding here because what we want the innovation team to be looking at is what are the leading indicators that we should be tracking and monitoring to say when we need to actually change or modify the solution, right? So we want to continue to track it as it's operating to say, when are the conditions changing such that we should think again about how it's currently being done? And then an example of that would be United Airlines tracking American Airlines gate applications at airports or fleet orders. They're going to track those because those indicate some change that might need to happen in their business model, in their airport relations, et cetera. And then we increase again on the grow because we're going to allocate some more for that. We're also looking at you can see here that the amount available, we have 400,000 here available. That means we've got 12,000 for each opportunity that's going to be promoted and 6,000 for opportunities that are going to be deferred. So in this example, and we'll share the link to this example with you, I believe, right, Chris? Everybody will get this. Yes. Okay. How could you say no now? You'll be able to explore this. You can see the example play out. So, but you can see when we start to allocate the fund, we've got to have in our mind, it costs less to get an opportunity to a no than it does to get it to a yes, right? So we're going to set a threshold for on average, how much do we expect to spend on opportunities that do not get promoted? How much do we expect to spend on opportunities that will get promoted? So we got to allocate it with that in mind. And then this is just looking at how much have we actually allocated to our different opportunities and what is still available, meaning how many opportunities can we continue to fund. So if you're managing a fund or if you're an executive making funding decisions, you want to be able to track all of this information, right? In this example, we had granted 1.3 million. We still have 1.8 million available, and we're putting some in a reserve. So there's some here that's been put aside for the unknown, the unexpected, which we always advise that our next fund, we don't allocate the entire fund, keep some in a reserve. Because of the uncertainty, we are going to learn things that are going to demand additional grants at different steps of the next cycle. Okay. So let me go back to the keynote. That's the example that we walked through. Other tools that are available to you, and I won't go through each of these, but other tools that are available to you, the Worth It tool. The Worth It tool actually is one of our next tools. It's available in the lab, and it will take you through the evaluation of capital risk, of capital contribution, of capital need. It'll help you calculate the capital impact score. It also asks you to establish what your capital priorities are. There's a drill in that tool that's called Worthy or Not. And the Worthy or Not drill is the drill that you use to establish your capital priorities, your capital building priorities. Those of you who are on the call who are here in a military come from the defense space, a military context, you know that financial capital is not the most difficult capital for you to get access to. Human capital is typically at the top of the priority list in a military context, or like I sit on a board that fights human trafficking. Human capital is at our top priority. We're trying to preserve and protect lives. Same thing in the defense space. Financial capital is lower down. In a military context or a defense context, it might be you might be looking at human capital, political capital, and reputation capital, because those are all necessary in terms of how Congress funds the military and for recruiting people into the armed services. So those might be the priorities. And we're looking at then the Worth It tool of, are these opportunities actually producing or building that kind of capital? Are they creating it? Are they protecting it? Are they liberating it in such a way that we can have even more impact? The Worth It tool helper is a GPT in ChatGPT that is quite helpful to filling out the Worth It tool, because the Worth It tool doesn't have an AI assistant built into it yet. So the Worth It helper is an AI assistant to help you explore what might be the risk associated with this opportunity, what might be the contributions, what might be the needs. And so you can score those much more, you can generate them and consider them, evaluate them, and include them much more easily than if you're just doing it with your own brain and your own time. Having an assistant brain is a good thing. The opportunity at a glance poster is one like the portfolio at a glance, but it's a drill and a poster that helps you look at the individual opportunity and how you're allocating funds to that. So very helpful in terms of funding an individual opportunity. The next fund manager is a GPT that's going to help you with the questions that you will probably have around funding. Everything from how do I allocate opportunities across my portfolio? How do I figure out my attrition rates, et cetera? So it's loaded up with all of these drills and more. It's been trained with all of those. So it's going to help you establish your fund and think about how you allocate that fund across your portfolio and over time. And the next step funder is another GPT that will help you evaluate how to make funding decisions for an individual opportunity at each step of the next cycle, as we were describing it. So those are some resources that you should play around with and explore. We of course didn't have time on this call to go do a deep dive into each of those, but we invite you to check them out. If you have a ChatGPT account, you'll be able to access those GPTs easily and play around with them. For some of the other tools, the portfolio at a glance, the Worth It tool, opportunity at a glance, you're going to need a NextLab Pro license to access those. Okay, Chris, you want to?
All right. That was a lot of information for a very brief period of time, but I think, Jade, you did amazing. Thank you so much. So before we move towards Q&A, we will be hosting a Leaders of Next Intensive this upcoming December from the 2nd to the 6th in San Juan, Puerto Rico. We still have some seats available if you want to join us, because we will be discussing funding and a lot more in 5 very intense days of learning how to make and implement intelligent innovation systems in an organization so it works in concert with your performance and actually makes innovation work in your organization. So if you want to join us, you're more than welcome. Today, you will be having the possibility to join us with a 30% discount of our fee. And if you have any questions, please come to me. I can help you. I can help you sort those out. Or if you have more questions for Greg, you can also contact me so I can contact you with him. So here's the link. You can scan the code if you want to access the information of Leaders of Next. And yeah, as I said, if you have any questions, you can come to me and we can sort those. There's also discounts for groups. So if you want to join with your team or you want to convince somebody to join, we will be having fun in December. And now we can go ahead and answer some questions while we have time. So first one, does the concept of affordable loss apply across the portfolio stages, increasing as more certainty is gained, or is affordable loss at the earliest stages only, most uncertain stages of problem and solution, says Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think affordable loss applies until you're in the operate stage, right? In the operate stage, you might be certain about what kind of loss is going to be incurred. Many years ago, many years ago, I'm going to say this was in 1989. I was working with Visa, and Visa had, for its existing credit card business, they planned on and accounted for $1 billion of loss a year to credit fraud. That was in 1989. Imagine what it is now. So that's in a known kind of operating environment. Just as we know we're going to have a certain amount of fraud, this is the size of it, and they insure against it. But up until the operate stage, then the affordable loss concept applies. As long as you have untested assumptions that are crucial, super vital assumptions that are untested, then affordable loss is a valid concept. That is, what capital do we need to invest in testing that assumption? And can we afford, if we test the assumption and the assumption comes back invalidated, meaning we were wrong and we shouldn't continue, can we afford the investment of the capital, right? If we size it. And that's why we talk about funding at the step-by-step basis, because what you're doing is protecting capital and saying, we're going to actually look at we're going to look closely at the super vital assumptions, those assumptions that are critical to our success. We're going to test those. We're going to allocate some small amount of the capital to test those. But if the amount of capital that's required it is a deal breaker, it says that we can't afford to be wrong, then we shouldn't actually be doing it.
Thank you, Jim. Here comes Tessa. It's a long one. Historically, I've worked for large companies that seem to be choosing acquisition over innovation at every turn. Additionally, every acquisition is exponentially more expensive than the last. Also, it seems like every company is hopping on the acquisition train. How do you propose managing this from within a company, especially in an innovation role? Types of compensation at different levels, quick innovation wins, taking this journey model across departments.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. There's a long answer to it. I'll try not to. We don't have a lot of time. I think the short answer is it is incumbent upon what we call leaders of next. So that could be an executive or a manager or simply somebody who has the desire to lead innovation in their organization. It's incumbent upon every innovation leader to start to frame these conversations in a way that is rigorous and disciplined, that shows that you are actually paying attention to the way that the organization thinks about things, and you're mapping what you want to do to that. So if an organization, what you're asking is actually an important strategy question for the organization. So we need to say, do we want to build capital, grow, is what you often will hear. Do we want to grow through acquisition only? Is that our strategy for growth? So we're going to do it inorganically. We're going to acquire things that allow us to grow, or are we going to do it organically? We're going to build our own. We're going to create some things that actually allow us to grow, or we're going to do some combination of those two things. We're going to have some of our investment is going to be made, and we're going to innovate through acquisition, and some of it is going to be organically. We're going to actually be building and growing things ourselves. I think that most organizations should be doing both. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about corporate venturing and then which is growing from the outside in and then growing from the inside out. So doing the organic, running our own innovation efforts and opportunities, doing our own internal venturing and trying to create new opportunities for growth that way. So I think it's like frame it as a strategic choice. Let's think about what our objective is. Let's talk about what our strategy is. And if a part of our strategy is, in fact, to do some innovation organically, we're going to do it from the inside out, then let's fund that accordingly. And let's compare that. Now, the challenge for a lot of organizations in that approach is it takes longer to see the capital created than if I go and buy something that's already halfway through the development process, right? But what we also see is a lot of things actually get killed when they're bought because they can't integrate effectively into the organization. So mergers and acquisitions are really difficult to pull off. And they have their own risks. So then started to talk about what's the risk of doing this internally? What's the risk of doing it externally? Maybe we should have a blended approach so we're diversifying that risk.
All righty. And the last question, I know we are over time, so those of you who have to leave, thank you for joining. But Uti has a question. What can we replace operate stage with to make the model more commercially viable and geared towards landing sales?
I'm not sure I totally understood the commercially viable piece of it because if it's a new product, I'm moving a product into operation. So I'm moving it into, I'm deploying the product, right? If it's a new service, I'm deploying the service in that operate stage. I think for sales, you could, sales, I think would like, instead of the word operate, would probably like the word live, which is we've gone live with it, right? It's now in the market or launch in live. Those are actually steps in the development cycle that in that stage. And I think those labels, you can change the labels on that diagram, that next cycle. Use the language that fits your organization, that fits your culture. And think about it as it's a model, but it's a framework that you might need to do some translation. Again, when we do work with people in the military context, none of the business-based language makes any sense. Everything has to get translated into a defense sector space. And I'd say do the same thing, if in your organization or within your sales culture, there's language that people are comfortable with and is known, just do the mapping and treat it as configurable. We're going to swap that word out for that word. I think this operating is going live, which the solution is now live. And we need to support it, right? And it has a whole set of costs. But when it's live, we need to be thinking about what do we need to be, what are the indicators we want to track so that we know when we need to start innovating again for that solution that says, hey, we need to actually modify some aspect of it, either optimize it or figure out, hey, it's actually something's happened that's going to allow us now to bring that to a market we can never serve before. It's live. We want to watch it and see what's happening. It's operating in a real world. And we want to track some things to say, where has a new opportunity presented itself to either create new capital or to protect the capital.